I felt this way. I felt the shame. I felt the guilt, the embarrassment, the anger, the sadness, all of those feelings. But I felt so alone feeling them. And it wasn't until I actually spoke up and started to voice those feelings when the change started.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flip That Shit. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and today's guest is going to be Lianne Torres. I'm really excited to have her here, guys, because her story is a big reason why I do this podcast. Let me share with those who are new to Flip That Shit what this is all about. So I'm a trauma coach, and one of my missions with this podcast is to allow people's stories to feel seen, heard, and understood. And if I know anything about abuse, anything about domestic violence, is that it shuts us down and it causes us to create a tremendous amount of self-doubt. So if you're listening to this podcast today, here's what I'm going to tell you. The goal is, if you resonate with Lianne's story, to pick up your phone, pick up your keyboard, send her a message, know that she is someone that can resonate with your story, that you are not alone. Because the goal of this podcast is this: everyone has challenge. Everyone has adversity. Everyone has a shit story. Everybody, even you. And so if you're sitting in a shadow of shame because you feel so bad about a relationship that you're in, or experience that you've had, or adversity that you've been through, and you feel so different and so not enough and so unworthy and undeserving of connection because of it, the goal here is that you can hear someone's story that maybe resonates just a little bit with yours, and it gives you the courage to say, I'm not alone. And I want to reach out to someone and share my story. That's the goal today. That's the goal of every podcast that I do. So let me tell you just a little bit about Lianne, and we're going to get right into it. Lianne Torres, she's a personal development coach, and she has her own podcast. It's called Watch Us Thrive, and it's a podcast where listeners can reconnect with their inner magic. Lianne's a survivor and an advocate for domestic violence. She's created her platform to be a safe space where people share their life experiences of turning pain into power, trauma into triumph. She recently launched her private one-to-one coaching where she can help single women who have experienced toxic or abusive relationships pick up the pieces, come back stronger than ever. She's passionate about helping you, the listeners and clients, heal from their own traumas by candidly sharing her own and the stories of others. Watch Us Thrive is a safe space that highlights tough and taboo conversations and is dedicated to being a resource for the voiceless. This is why she's on today, because we have such similar missions. So, Lianne, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just hearing you talk, it's like, wow. What an introduction. And I feel so seen. I feel so heard. And I really hope that in today's conversation, we can really help at least one person not feel the way that I used to feel. Because everything that you said, I was like, oh my God, that was me. That was me. I felt this way. I felt the shame. I felt the guilt, the embarrassment, the anger, the sadness, all of those feelings. But I felt so alone feeling them. And it wasn't until I actually spoke up and started to voice those feelings when the change started. I'm sure we're going to get into it, but
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I have chills as you're talking. So build us a timeline. At what age and at what year did you get into this relationship, and around what point did you realize it may not be healthy?
So it's actually pretty recent. It was during the pandemic, 2020. We know how shitty life was back then. So it was a pandemic relationship. I met him the end of April 2020. The relationship progressed very quickly, and it was also a very short-lived relationship. We were only together for 10 months, but it felt like a decade, honestly. But in the beginning, it was the beautiful relationship. I've had failed relationships before that were also toxic and abusive, but I didn't realize that until being on the other side now. And I thought I finally found my quote unquote forever partner. He was great. He treated me well. He made me laugh. It was very much a lust-driven relationship, if you know what I mean. And I really just held on to just the fact that I had attention from someone who's very attractive in my eyes. And I realize now, like, I felt like I didn't deserve being with him because I didn't feel as good about myself. And like, who the fuck am I to be with someone like this? Right. And I'm sure people have felt that way too in their own relationships. But, you know, in the beginning, it was great until it wasn't. I want to say maybe about 5 or 6 months into the relationship is when the switch started. It started off with him talking a little bit more aggressively to me, raising his voice a little bit more than what he used to do, getting angrier quickly, throwing things, you know, things that was like trying to instill fear in me without physically touching me. And that's something that I realized a lot of us survivors of domestic violence experience in the beginning of these toxic and abusive relationships. But I didn't put two and two together until the first time he put his hands on me. I don't remember what the reason was for, but I remember the reaction that I had when it happened. I was like, holy shit, what just happened here? Because it was like a complete switch from the person that I fell in love with in the beginning. I'll never forget, he grabbed my face so hard to the point that I couldn't brush my teeth for a couple of days afterwards, because that's how much it hurt to even smile, to even open my mouth, to even eat a meal. And, you know, I know that being on the other side now, that should have been one and done for me, but it wasn't. And that's something that a lot of us survivors experience too. The average number of times it takes for a victim to leave is 7. Could be more, could be less. But the physical abuse progressed every single time thereafter until the night of March 12th, 2021, when he almost killed me. I have the full in-depth episode on my podcast, episode 10. If you guys want to check it out, I actually recorded it on the 1-year anniversary of me surviving that night. And that moment, that was the catalyst for me to escape. That was the moment when I decided I'm going to put myself first again. I'm no longer going to accept this type of behavior. And that was the starting point of the change of me becoming the woman that I am today. But it took a while to get there.
That's a lot to unpack. So let's go backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
You said that it was not the first toxic relationship you had been in.
Nope.
So, and it's not something you had recognized prior. What caused you, as this was unraveling, to start to look back and see the pattern?
What I realized for me is that I had zero confidence in myself as a person on my own. I was the type of girl, I'm not even going to say woman, because I was very immature with the way that I thought, that I could not stand the thought of being alone. Being alone meant that there was something wrong with me, that nobody liked me, that I didn't love myself. Like, I needed someone in my life in order to validate those feelings that I didn't have within myself. So what I realized is that I just held on to any attention that I got, good or bad. And more times than not, it was bad attention. It was the negative attention. It was the chaotic fighting. It was the calling each other out. It was putting hands on each other, because I was abusive too in some of those relationships. It was a mutual thing. And I just realized that I literally did not know what it meant to be a person on my own. And I didn't know what it meant to really love myself as Lianne. I didn't know who Lianne was. I just yearned for that affection and love and whatever it was from somebody else, but I was really lacking within knowing who I was deep down in my core.
So, I asked you at the beginning, is there anything that's off topic? You're like, no. So I'm just going to dig in from the trauma coach lens, right? As I sit here and I listen, these are the thoughts that go through my head. What kind of relationship did you witness growing up through the people who were caretaking of you that led you to believe that this type of relationship was the most familiar for you?
I love that you asked that question, because, a lot of people would think she probably grew up in a home that was the same way. So that's why she attracted these type of people. But that's not the case for me. I grew up in a home where my parents, they're still together. They've been married for almost 50 years, high school sweethearts, came from Puerto Rico to the mainland. And I never saw physical abuse growing up. I did grow up in a home where healthy communication was not a thing. It's either yelling and screaming at each other or giving each other the silent treatment and brushing things under the rug and pretending like it didn't happen. And the next day we're back to normal. So that's definitely the type of relationship that I saw growing up in regards to it not being very emotionally healthy or communicative in a way that we can talk out our problems. And I definitely had that in my past relationships until I decided to really do the work and figure out what was it about me that I was attracting these type of partners. But yeah, I never knew what domestic violence was growing up. I never had people in my inner circle that experienced that. It wasn't until the last relationship that I did like this rabbit hole deep dive of really seeing, what is this? What does this mean? And realizing that I wasn't alone in being in these types of relationships, but it's something that's very taboo, very hush hush, very like what happens at home stays at home, and I'm going to mind my business and look the other way because that has nothing to do with me. But, you know, I feel like I survived what I went through, and I know I'm not the only person going through this. So I have a duty within me to talk about it, even if it makes you uncomfortable. But yeah, it's not something that I saw growing up.
Yeah. I mean, look, the reality is that it might not be something you live in, right? It's not a given. But sometimes within certain communities, within certain cultures, love can be a little bit more passionate. It can be a little bit more chaotic. It can be a little bit more dramatic. And, you know, our mind and our bodies go towards what's familiar. And it will absolutely run from what's unfamiliar.
Absolutely.
Right? So the likelihood that you are going to easily and effortlessly run into the arms of someone who was a great communicator, that talked about all of their feelings and, you know, had all of that, was probably going to feel unfamiliar. And I use that language a lot. And it's important for people to understand the reason why we go to what's familiar, even if it's not productive. It's because we know how to navigate it. It's predictable. It's constant. We know how to, I'm going to use this lightly, survive it. All of our coping strategies growing up are predicated on what we've observed.
Absolutely.
Right? And I always try to get people to understand that domestic violence abuse does not have to be physical.
Yes. Say that again. Say it again, because I think it went over some people's heads.
Yeah. So domestic violence or any kind of abuse does not have to be physical. And actually, I will say, I think it is the non-physical that fucks people up the most because they don't know how to put to words. There's no language for them to experience the cognitive dissonance, the confusion that is caused, which is part of the trauma.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, when we post edit this, I'm sure that my producer will help me put this domestic violence wheel up into this. If you're watching this on YouTube, so you can see there is a cycle of domestic violence that only a portion of it is physical. Yep. Only a portion of it has to be a physical abuse or a sexual abuse. So much of it is cognitive coercion. It is cognitive manipulation. It is financial manipulation. It is creating fear. So you said at the beginning, he wasn't hitting me, but there was this fear that I might, you know, maybe I'm standing next to a door and he kicks the door or he punches the wall and he would say, but I never hit you. So you don't think it's domestic violence, but what he's creating is terror. And the terror puts you, I'm going to put in quotes, in your place. The terror creates you to be submissive and allows for further control and manipulation. It's a part of a system that's put into place to keep you silenced and to keep you fear-driven. So you will not say anything, and it gives them a power of control. And this is all about control and power at this point.
Yep. Absolutely.
Right? So maybe you can share from your perspective, Lianne, some of the things that you experienced at the beginning that would fall underneath that domestic violence cycle that you did not know was domestic violence.
Yeah. I'm going to say the first one was infidelity. And I think a lot of people don't tend to look at that as a type of abuse. It absolutely is abusive. It's a type of an emotional abuse that I dealt with a lot in past relationships, but this one was by far the worst. I remember on the night that everything happened, before everything started to happen, we were verbally arguing with each other. And he was like, I don't give a fuck about you. I've been cheating on you with 7 different women over the past 4 months. Like, just throwing that thing in my face. And I had evidence prior of him cheating on me and just accepting it and continuing on thinking it's okay. So yeah, there was a lot of cheating. There was a lot of lying. There was a lot of manipulating. There was a lot of gaslighting, making me feel like I'm insane for thinking the way that I'm thinking and feeling the way that I feel. There was a lot of, in the beginning of the relationship, love bombing, which is something that is very on trend nowadays. But, you know, the love and the, oh my God, you're the greatest person in the world and no one can compare to you. And, you know, there was also a conversation around his ex was crazy and she did all these things and he hated her. But then later on in the relationship, I found out that he was cheating on me with her, the same woman that he hated, but yet she somehow ended up back in the picture. And there was just a lot of like yelling and just talking down on me, putting me down even more than I already felt about myself, and just like kicking me in the gut and making me feel like shit about myself and validating the shitty feelings that I had about myself. Like, no one's going to put up with you like I do. No one's going to love you the way that I like. All of these things to just slowly bring down my confidence into the mud, into the dirt, until it was non-existent. That was really
and that's kind of part of the playbook. Yeah. And that's what people, it's really important. And you really touched on so many of the key components of it, but it does start with the technical term is a love bomb. Yep. And we should really define what that is for people. So when you're dealing with someone, you know, let's just face it, Lianne is not the first person this guy abused. Mm-mm. Okay. This is his familiar. So that's a whole other podcast, guys, about, you know, abusers and what it is that they're doing why
I want to say real quick before you continue, after everything that happened, I ran a background check on him dating back to 2007. So many charges of domestic violence, of child endangerment, of all these things. So he is a habitual abuser.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And that is a whole other podcast that we could have because nobody wakes up one day and is born and decides that this is the way that they're going to live their life. Right. Yep. So there's a whole other backstory there. But the reality is that this guy is a habitual abuser. And, I'm going to call him like a relationship terrorist, if you will.
That's a good term. Yes.
Yeah. And what's important is that there is kind of this unspoken playbook. They know how to build trust before they break it down. And that's really the part of the cycle that people don't understand. And I hear this term a lot from my clients. It's they knew exactly how to build me up, and then they knew exactly what to do to break me down, but they would break me down just enough or I wouldn't leave. And then they'd build me back up again. And that's that confusion that gets created. And that's where the gaslight starts to come in. Yep. Because now you're starting to question your own reality. Because if you say, well, this happened, they'll say, yeah, but I did this. Mm-hmm. And you can't deny that they lifted you up, but it's part of the coercion. It's part of the manipulation that is now, especially in New Jersey, it's people to understand that there have been people that have been litigating at the state level to make sure that they can get manipulation and coercion into the domestic violence realm. Yeah. So when people are charged with domestic violence in the state, those things count. Yeah. Okay. And so We talk about love bombing, right? It's what do I need to do? What do I know? And it's really very calculated. What do I know is her weakness? And I'm going to love her for it. Right? You're gorgeous. I love your body. I love your confidence. You're amazing. Like anything that you have an insecurity about, they're going to come right out and tell you it is the thing about you that they love the most. Now, what's happening? You feel seen and you feel heard. And I want someone who's listening to really start to question what's the difference between love and feeling seen and heard. It's not a lot. Okay. So now you're building this trust with someone who you finally, for the first time, and I'm putting that in quotes for people who can't see it on YouTube, for the first time, finally feel fully seen, fully heard, fully understood. And once they know that that is the hook and it's been solidified, that's when the sword comes out and you have a fucking plastic spoon. You have no idea what you're in for.
Yeah.
Now, this is not to say that you can fall in love with someone and someone can fall in love with you and they can love all the parts of you that you're insecure about.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's not possible. That is fully possible. However, in a circumstance like this quote unquote love bombing was used as a technique to, I'm going to use this term very knownfully, what I'm saying, to groom this person because he is, as you said, a habitual abuser. He's a predator.
Yep.
Okay. He's grooming. This is part of the grooming. And then once he knows you're in and you feel safe and secure, it's not that they change. They now show you their true form.
Oh my gosh. I got like full body chills because I feel so seen. I say that all the time. It's like eventually the mask that he wore.
It's the mask that comes off. It's not that's the part that I think fucks people up the most. When I'm working with women, by the way, who've been in marriages that are 10, 15, 20, 30 years long, and they're saying to me, I just want to go back to the beginning to who that person was. And this is there's usually no physical abuse in these situations. It's all narcissistic, psychological abuse. It is a process, a grieving process for them to realize that actually the person at the beginning was not the authentic person.
He was never there.
That was part of the process. That's really hard for people to wrap their brain around. And it takes a long time for them to see this is not the first kind of relationship they've been in like this. It's just the one that stung them. It's the catalyst. It's the tipping point.
Absolutely. One. Yeah, that was definitely the tipping point for me, almost losing my life to be like, okay, something's got to change. Because it's been the same type of person in every relationship in a different body. But the common denominator in every relationship was me. So I had to step back and take a hard look and be like, what the fuck is going on with me? Not him, not the other one, not the in-betweens. What's going on with me that I need to work on in order to change the trajectory of the rest of my life?
What was it? What was it that was going on with you?
No confidence in myself, no love in myself, no wanting to be alone. I had this huge fear of being alone. Like I said before, like being alone meant something was wrong with me. And I just needed to do something completely different, which is what I've been doing. Like I took myself off the dating scene. I worked with professionals. I've been celibate since that relationship. And I've really just been focusing on getting to know Lianne by herself for the first time in my life. I'm going to be 35 next month. So for the first 32, 33 years of my life, I was a habitual relationship person to person, dating, having sex with someone, like just always had someone in my life, but never really getting to the root of who I am on my own.
And what have you gotten? I mean, I know it's a process,
Yes.
right?
Never ending
but
journey.
this is where I use hypnosis a lot with my clients. It's like when they come to me and they say, I want to know why. Because that lack of self-confidence, it doesn't come from nowhere.
Yeah.
It's built on a set of beliefs that you have about yourself that yield some sort of not enoughness. Yeah. Right. And so that's when we do the deep work. I call it like getting under the hood and really starting to see what were some of the milestone experiences in this person's life that not caused them to think that they were not enough. It was a feeling that was had that left them feeling different.
Yeah.
Right. So for you, like what kind of work have you done to get under that hood to look at where does this lack of confidence or where did that lack of confidence come from?
Yeah. So I started off with going to group therapy in the very beginning of other DV survivors. And honestly, back then it was very triggering for me to be around the same type of people, hearing the same type of relationships, the same type of things. It wasn't very helpful for me and just hearing other people's stories. So then I switched to going to one-on-one therapy, and I worked with a therapist who was young. He was Latino. I felt like he really understood me and saw me for who I am and didn't come from a place of shame or judgment. And I was really able to be super vulnerable in a space where, this is what he does all the time, but it's just me and him in regards to like other people listening and hearing. And, that was super, super helpful. And then I started working with life coaches as well. I worked with 2 separate life coaches and really just telling me things that I kind of knew about myself already, but I really had to go deeper and figure out why was I attracting this type of partner? Why did I feel this way? And a lot of it came from, growing up. I was bullied as a kid. I was not the most confident. I'm the second child of 2, and I've always had this type of feeling that like I wasn't wanted because my sister was planned and I wasn't. And there was just a lot of feelings of inadequacy and not feeling good enough. And I know it stems a lot from my childhood. And I think back also too to the very first relationship that I was in with my daughter's sperm donor, not even going to say father because he signed away his rights. But that relationship really caused a lot of turmoil within myself, especially when he left and he decided, I'm going to abandon you because I don't want you anymore. You're not good enough. That's where that really stemmed from a lot, that first relationship when I was 16 years old. Yeah.
That's powerful. And,
and I've never said that out loud before.
So what does it mean for you to say that out loud? Like, what does that feel like?
Now, I mean, doing the work, I'm okay with talking about it. It's not triggering for me. It's not like I'm going to cry, and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I'm glad that I said it out loud because I know I'm not the only person who has felt that way. And I stand on being super vulnerable and transparent and sharing my story for other people to be like, oh my God, I feel that way too, but I don't have it within me to say it. So I'll be the voice for the voiceless. I have no problem with that. And I've done a lot of work within myself to be able to get to that point.
Well, it's beautiful because one of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking earlier of the things that this last person was saying to you to cut you down, right? And it made me think of a book called The 4 Agreements. Are you familiar with the 4 Agreements?
No.
Oh, girl. It's like I have a very tiny hand, like this is a pen. Like I have a very teeny tiny hand. The book is the size of my hand.
Oh, wow.
It's this tiny little book. It's called The 4 Agreements. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz. And it's basically everyone's living a dream or a nightmare. And if you are in kind of a nightmare life and you want to wake up from that and build your own life, your own new dream, all you have to do is accept these 4 agreements. One is to be impeccable with your word. So it's not just how you speak to others, it's how you speak to yourself. Yeah. It's the words you use for or against yourself. Not to take anything personally, because it doesn't have to do with you. Don't make any assumptions, and just do your best. Yeah. Right? That's and powerful. Now there's a fifth agreement, and the fifth agreement is be skeptical, but listen. Okay. So earlier when you were talking, and I'm so used to listening for this, right? You were saying he was saying these things and they were knocking me down. And my thought in my head, what I heard was because she believed them to be true at some level. Yep,
absolutely.
Right? If she knew her truth and she trusted her knowing, that's what this little pink sign says. Know your truth and trust your knowing. If your truth had you seeing yourself from the get in a positive light, and there was no self-doubt on it, you would look at him and say, you're batshit crazy.
Yes. The Lianne now will say that, but the Lianne in 2020,
yeah. That's right. And that's part of the work, guys. You know, it's understanding why don't I know myself? Like you were like, I don't even know who Lianne is. Where did I lose myself along the way? Yeah. And how do I get back to her? Because here's what I know to be true. And you have a daughter, so this will speak to you. When our child is born, could be Lianne, it could be me, it could be your daughter, it could be my two kids. When a child is born, they are literally just a ball of love and light. They have no opinions. They're just wild observers of the environment around them. They have no judgments. They have no way to think anything other than I am pure love and light and I am deserving of all things and I'm worthy of all things. Yeah. And then they start to observe and they see things and they hear things and they make interpretations about those things that change the filter and the lens through which they start to see themselves, others, and the world around them. Yep. This is what happens. Okay. This is like the simplicity of it all. Yeah. So somewhere along the way, because let me tell you, Lianne, when you were a baby, you had total confidence. When you were sitting in that high chair and you didn't want what was on your plate, you threw it on the floor, yep. Or you screamed, or you pounded on the high chair table, right? Or when you started to crawl. You just started to crawl. And if you fell on your face, there was no part of you that was like, Lianne, you're a loser. Yeah. What are you doing? Yeah. Don't even bother getting up. It's never going to work. You just have this innate confidence that everything you want is available to you. Yeah. And you just start crawling again, or you just start walking again, or you just start running again. It's at some point you start to question yourself. You start to judge yourself, but it actually takes a little while to get there. So there is a piece of your life where everything you're talking about, that confidence, that worthiness, that deserving of existed.
Yeah.
And so the work that you're talking about, and I'm laying this out for the listener, is to get back to where did I drop that? Where did I shed that piece of myself, or those pieces of myself that were the confidence? When did the, criticism get louder than the confidence? Yeah. Where did the critic get louder than the cheerleader? It's not that the cheerleader and the confidence isn't there. It's just like a fucking whisper. Yes. So we just need to go back and find her or find him. And we need to start dialoguing with that part to say, hey, it's okay to come back to the forefront. Sometimes I've worked with clients and under hypnosis, they're able to say, well, when I was 2 years old, I kept hearing things like, you're too much, or dim it down, or you're too much is basically the message. Right. Quiet it down. And so this ball of, again, love and light, whose job is to bring joy into the world, wants to fit in, wants to be loved, wants to be a part of the collective, the family unit. And so she sheds that piece of herself that is that confidence and love and light.
Yes.
And when she sees it works, she's just going to keep doing it.
So many layers.
So many fucking layers, right? Yeah. What's so beautiful though is that when I can get my client to start seeing that they shed it, I can also guide them on how to go back and reconnect with it. Because as easily as you let it go, you can go back and reconnect with it if you believe that that's the right thing for you.
Right. Yep. So powerful. But it's hard work, and it's something that a lot of people don't want to do because it's scary, because you have to ask those uncomfortable questions, because you have to have those uncomfortable conversations with yourself. It's like, I'd rather not open up this wound and just continue and pretend like everything's okay. That was me for the majority of my life. Just bury shit deep down. That's what I saw growing up. That's what I continued growing up. But it got to the point that you have to, in my eyes, you have to get to the point that you're sick and tired of your own shit, to the point that it's like, okay, now we're going to start to make a serious change.
And it is important, and you said it, and I'm working with a handful of clients right now that are experiencing this. Yeah. It gets worse before it gets better, guys, even when you're working with a coach. Yes. And if I get another email or another text or another phone call, if I can't do this anymore because it hurts too much, that's when I can say to them, because you're finally doing the work.
Because it's working.
Does it feel good? Yeah. It's not going to feel good.
Yes.
Because you're really getting to the core of the wound. It's important for people to know when we talk about trauma, the Greek origin of the word trauma is wound, right? And so when we're starting to really heal the wound, instead of just throwing a fucking Band-Aid on it.
Hi, that was me.
Yeah, it's going to hurt. Yeah, for sure. But at some point, it will begin to heal. Yeah. And there will be a scab. And then you'll have new skin and you'll have a scar. Yes. And that's okay. Yes. It's okay. It's a war wound. You know, it's a life wound. Yeah. What are you going to do? It's part of your lived experience. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means that you'll have learned, hopefully, from it. Right. And for you, it really had to get to that point of, I'm going to lose my fucking life.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. 1,000%.
Now you have a daughter.
Yes. Just turned 14.
So, oh, good Lord, girl. Yes. I have a 14-year-old. This is not for the faint of heart.
Okay.
It's hard shit. Yeah. You talk about healing trauma. Yes. I'm not quite sure which is harder.
Exactly.
Parenting a teen or healing trauma. But you and I, we found ourselves in unique positions to break generational cycles. Yeah. You know, I talk a lot about generational and intergenerational trauma, legacy trauma, whatever you want to call it. I have clients that call it generational curses. Mm-hmm. This idea of it stops with me. Sometimes we get pushback from the people and the generations ahead of us. So have you gotten pushback from doing the work and trying to do things a little differently with your daughter?
No. And I'm so grateful for that, because I am so adamant in having a different type of relationship with my daughter than I had with my mom growing up. And I've talked about this a lot on my own show. I love my mother to death, but she is probably one of my biggest triggers. And you know, growing up, I did not have a relationship with her where I felt safe with my emotions, where I could talk to her and not be judged or shamed. I never came to her if, you know, there was something going on at school, if I had a crush on a boy. Like, we never had that type of open dialogue. But now, me being a mother to a teenager, we have such an open, communicative relationship. She literally tells me everything, and vice versa. And I'm so proud of that, because I didn't have that growing up, like I said. And like you said, we have to be the cycle breakers. We have to break the chain of what's passed down from us in order to not continue with the next generation. And I told my daughter everything. I'm so grateful that she wasn't living with me when I was in that abusive relationship. It's a whole thing that happened, but she was living in New Jersey and I was living in Florida, and she wasn't around for the physical abuse, but she did see some of the emotional abuse that happened because she was staying with me for a little point in time during the pandemic. But, when I came back home, I told her everything. I told her everything that happened that night. I told her everything that he said to me. Like, I didn't hold anything back because I didn't want to continue walking on eggshells like I was in that relationship, or like makes things seem not as bad as they were. It was pretty bad. And, she went to therapy. I went to therapy. We went to therapy together. But I'm really just so proud that she feels safe with me. She trusts me, which I think is so important for a parent kid relationship to have. And just for me to be able to be a guiding light for her, that when she does decide to start dating, whether it's a man or a woman, whoever, that she learned from my own experiences, and she learned from that because I was open about it with her and talked to her about it, as opposed to like,
and she knows what she's worth deserving of.
Exactly.
And what would never be enough.
Exactly. Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That's the biggest part of breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
And I think it's also really important because you really leaned on it. And, this is where I see people struggle the most is maybe they loved their parent, but they've also accepted my parent limited me through some serious, parented me through some massive limitation.
Yeah, for sure.
And I can have both. I can love my parent, but it wasn't I needed different.
Yeah.
To be parented differently.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Without feeling guilt about that. Right? We all need to understand that every single one of us comes into the world and lives the world through a unique set of experiences that are designed for us. Mm-hmm. So when your parents had you and when you had your daughter, there was no handbook that was like, oh, you're going to be a parent now. Right. So you obviously know how to be a parent. And none of the lived experiences you've had up to this point are going to limit your ability to connect with someone. Right. Because your mother did the best she could, given the limitations she was raised with.
And now I understand that. Before I didn't, but doing the work that we talked about, I understand that now. And I don't hold that against her like I used to.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're all a work in progress. Absolutely. Even myself. With my own parents, yep. It's a work in progress, is accepting people for who they are. Yep. And this nonsense of having to expect more. God knows I was on that train forever and ever and ever. And now I'm just like, I guess this is it. Take it or leave it.
Exactly. Yep.
And that does not come easily. Yeah. That's a very painful acknowledgement.
Exactly. But it's real. It's a real acknowledgement. I
always say you can have radical awareness, but radical acceptance of that shit is other level. Yep. And it usually comes with a lot of pain and a lot of tears and a lot of sadness. Mm-hmm. There's grief to that acceptance. Absolutely. But on the other side is kind of freedom.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So let's chat a little bit. I think people have a good understanding of your experience and how, your level of understanding of what it's like to be in these types of abusive relationships. If someone's listening and your story resonates with them, what is a good way for them to get in touch with you?
Yes, absolutely. So I do have my one-on-one coaching where I want to help women who are in these types of relationships or have left them and are really on the journey to finding themselves, because I lost myself when I was in that relationship. So you can contact me on my website, wutpodcast.com. There's a little section at the top that says coaching, and you can book a free discovery call so we can just talk, just have a conversation and see where your head is at and if I can help you, because I'm not for everyone and I don't want to be, but I definitely have that resource available. Just slide in my DM too. You know, I'm always on Instagram, Watch Us Thrive podcast. I love talking to you guys. I love being able to just give little bits of advice or, you know, just dump your things on me, right? Like, I just like being able to be that type of person because I've been there and I know exactly how you feel. So those are really the two main areas, Instagram and my website. And check out my podcast too. You can listen to Watch Us Thrive. New episodes drop every Tuesday at 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have so many different guests on there that have so many different life stories and experiences that I know you'll be able to be seen and heard in one of those. So check that out. It's a free resource. And I have a blog section on my website too that you can check out that has a lot of good information. I'm just out here trying to help people not feel so alone because I felt so alone. So, you know, I'm here to help in any way that I can.
Yeah. And I guess one question I have is, what was the first step you took to not being alone? Who did you step to first to say, I have a problem?
I went to my best friend when I was living in Florida that night that everything happened. It was like 1:00 in the morning. I banged on her door. She saw how I looked and she was like, what the fuck? And that was the first time that I spoke up and I said something was going on. Because before that, no one knew. My family, I didn't live with them. They were, you know, across the state. My sister lived in the same city, but she didn't know because I didn't feel safe to tell her. But that was the first time that I spoke up when I almost died. And that was the change for me. So my piece of advice would be for anyone who's going through it is like, speak up. Say something. I know it's scary. I know it's hard. I know you're, oh my God, what's going to happen? The future, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, the fear of the unknown. But speaking up can literally change your life. It can literally save your life.
Isn't it interesting? Like, I know there are a number of reasons why people don't speak up. One is that they do fear for their life. You know, there are people that are going to fear for their life and fear that they will be killed if they speak up. And that's, in some cases, a very rational thought. But I think in a lot of ways, people don't speak up and are alone because they're afraid if they speak up, they'll end up alone.
Ooh, that was a whole like bar.
Yes, do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's like you're alone in the sense that you're not sharing with anyone out of the fear that if they find out, I'm going to end up alone.
Absolutely.
So in either way, you're fucked. Yeah. So you might as well get to the side of safety in that fear, but the fear is probably not very rational to begin with.
Absolutely.
Right.
100%.
So if there's one thing you could end with here, if there's one piece of advice you could give to somebody that's listening that says, shit, this might be me, what would you say?
Trust that feeling because it's coming up for a reason. That was something that I ignored a lot in my last relationship. I had this feeling that something wasn't right. I had this feeling of not feeling safe. I had this feeling of like, this isn't the person I'm supposed to be with, but I chose to continue to ignore it until it got so loud that I couldn't ignore it anymore. So if any piece of this conversation is resonating for you, it's probably coming up for a reason. And I think it's time for you to start reevaluating where you're at. And like I said before, speaking up and asking for help because you don't need to go on this journey alone. And you shouldn't feel like you have to take on the burden of leaving this type of relationship on your own. You don't have to.
I just want to ask you one question because I'm thinking of somebody in particular. There's sometimes this thought process that's like, oh God, I don't want to do this again. Let's just say hypothetically it's a marriage. Let's say it's a legally bound, maybe even religiously bound relationship where they've been divorced. Now they're in a second relationship. They didn't do the work in between the two. So they're finding themselves, the packaging looked different. But then once you were in it, you're like, motherfucker, I'm in it again, but I'm not leaving this time because I don't want to be seen as a failure. I don't want to be judged. I'm not going to be alone again. I'm not. So I'm willing to endure. What do you say to somebody that's finding themselves in that position?
I think for me, it just goes back to what I said before. Like, you have to get to the point that you're sick and tired of feeling the way that you're feeling, and no one is going to be able to change your situation but you. And for me, like, I was in a shitty relationship for almost 9 years. I didn't do the work. And then I found myself in this other shitty relationship that almost took my life. So I'm so big on accountability. I'm so big on, like, I'm going to take part responsibility for what I dealt with, even though the abuse that I went through wasn't my fault and I didn't deserve that. There was a part of me that I chose to stay in this situation, even though I knew. Like, I think, especially as women, we know, like, we have that inner intuition. We have that feeling. We have that, like, something is not right. And I had all those feelings, but I chose to stay. And for that, I need to take responsibility for it. So if you're in the point right now that you're like, I don't want to start over, that's fine for you to feel that way, but you eventually have to get to the point that no more. I'm not going to take this shit anymore, and I'm going to stand up for myself. But that's your journey on your timeline, and I get that completely. But for me, it's just like I got to the point that I was sick and tired of feeling the way that I was feeling.
What would you say to somebody who thinks maybe I actually deserve this?
You do. Absolutely 100%. That feeling is coming up for a reason. You do deserve you do. Wait, do you deserve what's happening to you?
What I'm saying is, because I know what you're saying, but
okay.
I want you to...
I think you're saying that I deserve the abuse?
Yes.
Oh, okay. No, scratch that. Let's edit that part out. You do deserve it? Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right.
No, what is, so let's reverse this. Yeah. For someone that says, maybe I deserve this. Maybe I don't deserve any better than this shit. What do you say to them?
I felt that way too. I literally felt that way. In the second relationship that I was in for almost 9 years, I felt it wasn't very much physical abuse, but there was a lot of emotional abuse. And I had that feeling of like, this is the best that I'm going to get. So I'm just going to continue dealing with it, because who's going to put up with me? He's been around for so long. Like, I guess this is the best that I can do. Right. So I totally understand that completely. But I want you to know that you do deserve healthy love. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve peace. You deserve to be able to, like, breathe and not have this burden feeling on top of you. And like I said before, you have to get to that point. Right. And some journeys are longer than others. Some people get to that point quicker than other people, but I completely understand how you feel, because I felt that way about myself too. But again, like I said before, I stand on accountability and having to take some responsibility over yourself and being like, there's some things that I chose to deal with. Let's unpack that and figure out why. But you have to ask yourself those uncomfortable questions. But
yeah, I think it's, when you're working with people who are coming out of these very fragile situations, I think one of the biggest things to work towards at the beginning is this letting go of self-judgment and giving yourself a lot of grace
and compassion,
and saying, listen, you did what you could with what you knew, with what you believed at the time. But when you know better and you want different, you can do different.
Yep, absolutely.
It's timing.
Yep.
So anybody that is listening that resonates with Lianne's story is worth having a discovery call with Lianne. So it's all in the show notes, but let me just spell it out for you. If you're listening and you want to pull your car over and write it down real quick, it's WUT. Okay. Watch Us Thrive, WUT podcast. You can find her on Instagram, Watch Us Thrive podcast. You can listen to her podcast. You can go on her website. You can get a free discovery call. She's available to listen. She's available to validate that you are not alone. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was a beautiful conversation.
And if guys, you liked this podcast, I highly encourage you to subscribe to my podcast. It's called Flip That Shit, where we have amazing conversations just like the one that you listened to. And we also drop every single week. So thank you so much, Lianne, for being our guest today. It was really awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.